She was 8 when she first realized memories could lie. Not the big ones that everyone talked about, but the quiet ones that lived between sentences and looks. She remembered the color of her mother's dress that day, pale blue, soft like a sigh, and the way her father's voice shook when he said, "Asterisk, everything's fine." Asterisk. It wasn't the words she remembered. It was the space after them, the small pause that made her heart race. Even as a child, she understood that silence carried more weight than truth. She spent the rest of her life trying to forget that moment, but it stayed stitched inside her memory like a scar, invisible, yet always there. She could recall the smallest details, the smell of coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of rain tapping the window. She could remember how her mother smiled too quickly, how her father avoided her gaze, and how the air felt heavier than usual. Didn't Tina then that this was the beginning of the lie that would shape her childhood. She just knew something had shifted. She began collecting moments the way others collected photographs, storing them inside her mind so she wouldn't lose the truth to time. Years later, when people asked why she remembered so much, she would shrug and say, "Asterisk, I just noticed things." Asterisk, but what she really meant was asterisk, I remember. Because no one else will. Asterisk, she remembered her mother's hands trembling while folding laundry, her father's quiet sighs behind closed doors, the sound of footsteps that stopped before reaching her room. Every piece of silence became a sentence in a story she was too young to understand. As she grew older, the memories didn't fade. They sharpened like glass edges. She could run her mind along them and feel them cut, but she couldn't let Tim go. She began to see patterns in the way her family moved around each other, a choreography of avoidance, her mother humming when her father spoke, her father smiling too long when her mother laughed. She memorized it all because someone had to. Memory became her inheritance, her way of keeping them alive, even when the love between them began to rot. Sometimes she wondered if remembering was a blessing or a curse, because the more she remembered, the less she belonged. She carried their past in her chest like a secret she never agreed to keep. Every detail replayed itself at night when the house was quiet. Her father's voice, the echo of her mother's whisper, the truth no one wanted to speak. She tried to tell herself that maybe the past could change if she forgot, but forgetting felt like betrayal. So she held on. She held on until the memories became louder than the present, until every smile felt rehearsed, and every silence familiar. She didn't know what she was waiting for, only that one day the truth would stop hiding, and when it did, she would finally understand why she could never forget. Asterisk. She learned to listen before she learned to speak. Asterisk, not because anyone told her to, but because silence was the only language that made sense in her house. Every word was measured, every question softened by tone and timing. She grew up reading the space between voices, the flicker of her father's eyes before he changed the subject, the tremble in her mother's smile when someone mentioned the past, the quiet sigh that followed laughter that wasn't real. She memorized those silences until they became her compass, her way of knowing who they really were. She used to sit at the dinner table watching them like a scientist studying weather patterns. She could predict the storms before they came. A single glance, a misplaced pause, a breath too deep. She loved them both, but love inside that house felt like walking on glass. Everyone moved carefully, afraid to cut the surface of what looked whole from the outside. Her friends used to say she was lucky her parents never fought, but she knew better. Loudness meant life. Silence meant danger. She wondered if they could see the way the air changed when they entered the same room. How the walls seemed to tighten. How the clocks ticked louder, as if trying to fill the gaps where truth should have been. She began to imitate them without realizing it. The careful tone, the soft laugh, the way her mother filled questions with stories instead of answers. One night, she caught herself lying about something small, a harmless detail about school, and she felt the chill of recognition. She had inherited the same survival instinct, the same reflex to protect others from truth. Se hated it, but she also understood it, because silence had kept them safe for so long, or at least that is what they believed. When she looked at her mother, she didn't see weakness. She saw exhaustion disguised as grace. When she looked at her father, she saw guilt pretending to be strength. She wanted to tell them she saw it all, that she wasn't fooled, that she carried their secret too. But she didn't, because she had learned their rules. Keep quiet, keep peace, pretend it's love. Years later, she would think back to those dinners and realize that silence had been the third parent in that house, always present, always watching, always deciding what could and couldn't be said. And she had grown up trying to please it, to earn its approval. She had learned to smile even when her chest ached, to agree even when she wanted to scream. And in doing so, she became part of the lie she once tried to understand. The silence between faces became her reflection, and she wondered if she would ever learn another language. Asterisk, asterisk. It was a photograph that changed everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Not a recent one, but an image buried deep inside a box her mother kept at the back of the wardrobe. A box that smelled like dust and perfume and forgotten summers. She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for something else. An old book, maybe. A piece of herself. But what she found was a memory she didn't know existed. It was a picture of her parents before she was born, standing in front of a small house, sunlight in their eyes, smiles untouched by the weight that would later bend them both. Her mother's hand rested over her father's heart. A gesture so tender it felt almost foreign. There was another figure in the corner of the frame, blurred by motion, someone she didn't recognize. A stranger, half turned toward them. The image was innocent, but her instincts told her it wasn't. She stared at it for a long time, tracing the edges of faces with her thumb, trying to feel what the camera had captured beneath the light. Something unspoken. She felt the ache of realization before understanding it. Memories rearranged themselves behind her eyes, aligning with this new proof. She remembered her mother's sudden silences, her father's distant gaze, the tension that lived in the house like invisible dust. She felt the truth breathing inside that photograph like a heartbeat buried in paper. She slipped it into her pocket, unsure why. Maybe to protect it, maybe to protect herself. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image glowed in her mind, refusing to fade. Every detail whispered something: the position of hands, the shadow that fell just so, the space between them that now looked like distance. She woke up at dawn and laid the photograph on her desk beside a mirror. The faces seemed to stare back at her, accusing her of seeing too much. She wanted to ask them why they lied, but photographs only answered through silence, and she knew that language well. The more she looked, the more she realized she wasn't just seeing their secret. She was seeing the origin of hers, the place where her story began long before she was born. The next morning, she asked her mother who was the person in the picture. The question hung in the air like smoke. Her mother froze for a second before smiling that same smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes, and said, asterisk. Just a friend, asterisk. But the way she said it made the words sound heavier than confession. The daughter nodded, but didn't believe her. She couldn't, because the photograph had already told her the truth. It had spoken in the only way truth can. Through stillness, through what's missing, through the distance between two people pretending they're whole. She put it back in the box, but the memory stayed awake. She carried it like a secret she never agreed to keep. And from that day on, every time she looked at them, she saw the space in that photograph living between their faces. Asterisk, asterisk. The truth didn't arrive as revelation, but as recognition. Asterisk, asterisk. Like a sound she had been hearing her whole life finally named. She came home from school to find her parents sitting at the table, the same table that had witnessed years of polite, quiet. Her mother's hands were folded, her father's eyes fixed on a point far beyond the room. The photograph lay between them. She didn't remember placing it there, but maybe she had. Maybe she had grown tired of carrying something that wasn't hers. Her father looked at her, then at the image. His expression, a mixture of fatigue and surrender. He said her name softly, as if preparing to lose it. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, asterisk, I know. Asterisk. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Her mother started to speak, stopped, started again, her voice trembling on the edge of confession. Asterisk. It was a long time ago. Asterisk, she said, as if time could excuse truth, as if years could bury guilt. The daughter nodded, not because she accepted it, but because she understood it, the way one recognizes a wound inherited before birth. She realized she wasn't angry. She was exhausted. She had spent her entire life trying to make sense of a story that began long before her. And now that she knew it, she felt older than both of them. She wanted to tell them that their lie had shaped her, that she had grown around it like a tree twisting toward light that wasn't there. But she couldn't find the words. Her voice felt foreign, unused. She looked at them and saw not parents, but people, fragile, imperfect, scared people who mistook silence for love. She didn't want to punish them. She only wanted to stop repeating them. She picked up the photograph and studied it again, this time noticing herself reflected faintly in the glass. 3 generations of silence, layered in a single image. Asterisk. I don't hate you. Asterisk, she said. Asterisk. I just don't want to live like this. Asterisk. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Her father reached for her hand, but she stepped back gently, not out of anger, but self-preservation. The room felt smaller. filled with all the words they never said. She realized that truth isn't loud. It doesn't destroy. It exposes, and once it's seen, it cannot be unseen. The photograph would never go back to being a picture. It was evidence of who they were and who she was becoming. She turned toward the door, her heartbeat steady, her hands trembling. She didn't look back because she knew they were watching, and for once, she didn't need to understand them. She needed to understand herself. The echo of silence followed her down the hall, soft, almost kind, reminding her that even echoes fade when no one answers. Morning came with a stillness she hadn't felt in years. Sunlight poured into her room like it was trying to start over. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the photograph one last time. The image no longer hurt. It didn't accuse, it simply existed like an old scar that had lost its sting. She realized that remembering wasn't punishment, it was survival. Her whole life, she had tried to forget the sound of unspoken words, the weight of smiles that lied, but memory had protected her. It had kept her from becoming part of the silence that shaped them. She looked out the window and saw her mother in the garden, moving slowly, tracing her hands across the flowers, as if learning how to touch again. She wondered if her mother finally felt lighter too, if letting truth breathe had loosened something inside her. Her father passed by the window carrying a box, his shoulders curved not with guilt, but with acceptance. She didn't hate him anymore. She understood him now, not as a villain, but as a man who had built his life on fear of losing what he loved, and in doing so, lost it anyway. She stood and walked outside. The air was sharp, the world strangely bright. She handed the photograph to her mother, who hesitated before taking it. Their fingers brushed, a quiet understanding passing between them. No words, no explanations, just a shared grief for all the years, lost to silence. I remember everything. She said, her voice steady. Her mother nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Maybe that's good. She whispered. Maybe someone should. They sat together for a long time, the photograph resting between them like a truce. She realized that remembering wasn't about holding pain. It was about keeping truth alive, so it wouldn't have to be carried by anyone else. She would remember, so her daughter one day wouldn't have to. She thought about the echoes that had haunted her childhood, the whispers behind doors, the soft apologies hidden in gestures, and for the first time, they felt distant, fading, like old music. She could finally breathe without guilt. She understood now that memory wasn't a cage. It was a key, and that freedom didn't come from forgetting, but from facing what others couldn't. She looked up at the sky, clear and wide, and said quietly, Thank you, Not to anyone in particular, but to the version of herself that had endured the silence and survived it. She walked back inside, leaving the door open so light could fill the rooms that once held shadows. If this story reminded you of something real, subscribe to The Silent Truth, and tell us in the comments if you've ever carried a memory like this or know someone who has.